Hi, everybody. It's Pastor Daniel here again with Ask the Pastor Part 2 this time. We have another great question from one of our youth. This time, the question is, what makes Methodist unique or distinct from other Christians or other denominations? As I said, that's a great question. And the one asking may notice that there are many different denominations throughout Christianity. I mean, there's Catholics, there's Baptists, there's Lutherans, Presbyterians. There's even non-denominational, which is its own type of Christianity itself. Even within some of these things that I've mentioned, there are different types of each one. There's even different types of Methodists. We have AME, we have Nazarene, and what we are, United Methodists. I know you don't probably want a huge history lesson. You have enough in school, but the quick gist of how they came about is there's differing ideologies, differently thoughts about God, and so some of these groups split off from one another. There's also different thoughts of how these churches should be organized or structured. For example, the Catholics have a pope. Baptists, on the other hand, are usually organized with the congregation having all of the control and power. And United Methodist, we are somewhere in between. We have bishops, but we also have members of our church who are part of a voting group that helps to make decisions for the church at large. But that's kind of the nitty-gritty of who we are. But what makes United Methodists themselves unique? And that's a tough question. It's probably not one that I could really do due diligence to in a video like this. This video itself is probably going to be longer than you would want. But I'll try to do my best to answer it as succinctly as possible. We're not actually alone in many of the beliefs that we have. Other denominations share a lot of the beliefs that we have. What makes us different is maybe the emphases that we place on things. So the thing that we as Methodists are probably best known for is our understanding of grace. Again, all Christians believe in grace. But as Methodists, we have this understanding of grace that God is at work throughout our entire lives. And so God is at work before we even know God is working in our lives. Maybe even before we know God, God is at work. We also understand that God is at work in transforming us as we come to accept God in our lives, as we accept that forgiveness of sins, as we are put on the right path, that God is at work kind of transforming us and making things right. But even from that moment, God is still at work in our lives. That God is at work each and every day of our lives to help to make us love more as God loves us. And so we recognize this understanding of God's grace or God's presence with us that is a journey of salvation, that God is saving us not only in the future, but God is saving us now by transforming us now. And because of this, we do differ on how we approach some things from other denominations. For example, baptism. Because we understand God as being the one at work in our whole lives. We believe that anybody, no matter of age, can be baptized. That includes babies, because it's God who is at work. The moment of us kind of professing where we believe is a moment we call confirmation. A moment later when we are of age and are able to say that we affirm what God is already doing in our lives and that we can commit to it is something that is our response to the baptism that we have received. So that's one way that we differ. Another is through communion. Because we recognize grace can be at work in so many different ways in our lives. We say all are able to come and receive communion, no matter who you are. So the communion table is open to all. So that's just some of the ways that we differ from other denominations. But as I talk about it, I want to make it clear that these differences that have been lifted up are just differences of ways that people are experiencing or striving for God. we are still part of one big church. We're still, all these denominations are still part of God's church. A professor of mine once pointed out that all of the striving or understanding for God can lead us to, talk about God a little differently. And you can see these emphases of how we talk about God differently, even through praise songs that we do. So if you look at some of the famous praise songs or some of your favorite praise songs, it'd be interesting to see how it talks about God. And you'll find that some of the ones that talk about God that come from denominations that maybe are not as Methodist or what we call Wesleyan theology, they'll have emphases on God, usually with God's power, God's glory, God's might and ability to save us. Whereas Methodist theology, often songs with that theology will often focus on God's grace, God's love, God's compassion. And it's not that you won't find power and glory in Methodist theology. It's not that you won't find love and grace in other theology. It's just the emphases that we place on things. None of these are wrong. It's just that we put different emphases on things so that we can experience God and try to understand God to the best of our ability. So that's what makes us as Methodists a little different, distinct from other denominations. Mostly our emphasis on grace and how that is lived out in our understanding through things like baptism, through things like communion. I could go on and on with some other things. We have something called the holiness tradition. We have things called our social gospel, but I'll stop here. If you're interested in those things, feel free to ask. And another question, I can certainly talk about them. If you need clarity on anything that I've talked about here, again, feel free to ask. Anybody else have any other questions? Any questions that you want to ask me? Nothing is really off the table. You can ask at pastor@roundhillumc.org, or you can comment below, and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. Hope you all are having a great day, and God bless you all. Bye.